Jayne Mansfield, the most brilliant woman Hollywood ever trapped inside platinum blonde hair. Born brilliant, died blonde. The numbers tell the story. IQ 163, measurements 40 to 21 to 35. The world remembered the measurements, forgot the mind. They see my body, but they never hear my heart, she said in her final interview. Words that would become epitaph for a woman who spent her life imprisoned in a beautiful cage of her own creation. Here was someone who spoke multiple languages fluently, played classical piano like a virtuoso, devoured philosophy texts for breakfast, yet died known primarily as mathematical equation of male desire. A beautiful prison. That's what fame became for Jayne Mansfield. A cell constructed from sequins and publicity stunts with bars made of platinum blonde hair and walls built from society's refusal to see beyond surface. She won the game so completely that she was never allowed to change the rules. How does someone with everything, a brilliant mind, strategic genius, and boundless ambition, become buried alive beneath their own measurements? The answer lies in the cruel economics of 1950s Hollywood, where women's intelligence was inversely proportional to their sex appeal, and where being taken seriously meant being seen as less desirable. This is the story of the smartest woman who ever pretended to be dumb, the strategic mastermind who built her own beautiful prison, and the brilliant performer who was never allowed to escape the role that made her famous. The brutal Pennsylvania winter of 1933 seemed to forge something extraordinary in the child who would become Jayne Mansfield. Though the form her greatness would take was shaped as much by loss as by natural gifts. Born Vera Jayne Palmer in Bryn Mawr, she entered a world where being overlooked meant being forgotten, and being forgotten meant ceasing to exist entirely. Her father, Herbert's death when she was 3, created the foundational psychology that would drive everything that followed. An almost supernatural determination never to be ignored, never to blend into backgrounds, never to accept invisibility as acceptable fate. The trauma didn't break her. It taught her that attention was survival, and survival required using every weapon at her disposal. Brains versus body. The central tension of her existence revealed itself early. While other children played with toys, Jayne devoured books with voracious hunger. Languages came to her like music, German and Spanish flowing from her lips as naturally as English. Her fingers found magic on piano keys, coaxing classical compositions from instruments with precision that amazed teachers twice her age. But even as her mind expanded, her body was developing in ways that commanded attention she hadn't sought. The cruel lesson of adolescence became clear. Society rewarded surfaces while punishing depth. The same curves that made her stand out in school hallways would later become prison walls that confined her potential. The teenage Jayne who entered beauty contests wasn't abandoning intellectual pursuits. She was conducting strategic analysis of power structures that excluded brilliant women from conventional success paths. If society insisted on judging her appearance first, she would master that game while secretly nurturing the mind that truly distinguished her. Her early marriage to Paul Mansfield provided the surname she would make legendary, but it also revealed patterns that would define her entire adult life. A brilliant woman trying to squeeze herself into societal expectations that felt increasingly suffocating as her ambitions grew. The birth of daughter Jane Marie should have completed the perfect 1950s domestic picture. Yet something inside her continued reaching toward stages large enough to contain her actual capabilities. Agency versus objectification. The paradox that would define her career was already forming. Could a woman use her objectification as weapon to gain agency? Could someone transform being seen as object into owning the means of their own image production? Jayne was about to find out. The move to Texas with Paul represented an attempt at conventional married life, but intellectual restlessness made traditional domesticity feel like slow death. She continued studying, continued performing, continued dreaming of platforms that could showcase all her gifts rather than just the ones society found most comfortable acknowledging. Local theater work revealed someone whose talents transcended physical beauty in ways that made directors uncomfortable. She memorized complex dialogue instantly, grasped character motivations with sophisticated understanding, delivered performances that elevated mediocre material. But even in supposedly artistic environments, attention focused relentlessly on her appearance rather than her craft. The contradiction was becoming impossible to ignore. The very attributes that attracted people to her were preventing them from seeing her completely. Her beauty was becoming veil that obscured intelligence rather than complementing it. The world wanted her to choose between being taken seriously and being desired, a choice no man would ever be forced to make. By her early 20s, Jayne had reached strategic conclusion that would reshape American celebrity culture. If Hollywood wanted blonde bombshells, she would give them the most spectacular blonde bombshell imaginable. But she would execute this performance with such intelligence and self-awareness that the act itself became commentary on the system that demanded it. The woman who prepared to assault Hollywood wasn't the simple sex symbol she would be remembered as, but a complex strategist playing the most sophisticated game in entertainment history, using society's limitations as raw material for creating something unprecedented. The bright lights of 1950s Hollywood illuminated dreams and destroyed them with equal efficiency. But Jayne Mansfield arrived armed with something most hopefuls lacked: a doctoral-level understanding of media manipulation and the strategic brilliance to deliver exactly what the industry wanted, but better than anyone expected. Her campaign wasn't amateur stumbling, but calculated warfare conducted by someone who had studied the battlefield and intended to conquer it. If you're going to do something wrong, do it big because the punishment is the same either way. This became her operational philosophy, though few recognized that the wrongness she referenced was society's discomfort with women who refused to apologize for their sexuality, intelligence, or ambition simultaneously. A beautiful prison was already under construction, but Jayne was the architect. Her publicity stunts revealed genius-level understanding of psychology and media cycles. The famous wardrobe malfunctions, the pink Cadillac, the over-the-top personas. None of it was accidental. While other actresses waited for opportunities, Jayne manufactured them with precision that would have impressed Madison Avenue executives. She understood that in attention economy, being talked about mattered more than what people said. The strategic use of pink wasn't aesthetic choice, but branding revolution decades ahead of its time. Every detail of her public image was calculated to create immediate recognition and emotional response. She was transforming herself into brand rather than merely performer, maintaining ownership of her image in ways that seemed prescient decades later. Her Playboy pictorial represented masterpiece of strategic thinking disguised as spontaneous exhibition, while critics dismissed it as desperate publicity seeking. Jayne understood she was participating in something revolutionary: the transformation of female sexuality from hidden shame to open power. She was among the first to recognize that women could profit from their own objectification if they maintained control of the process. Agency versus objectification. She was attempting to resolve this paradox by becoming both subject and object, controller and controlled, mastermind and product simultaneously. But the system that elevated her was also trapping her. Every successful publicity stunt reinforced public expectations about who she was supposed to be. The pink persona that brought fame was becoming straitjacket that prevented evolution. She was winning the game so completely that she was losing the right to change the rules. Her film debut in The Girl Can't Help It should have established her as a serious performer. The comedic timing was flawless, the emotional depth surprising, the screen presence undeniable. Critics who expected decorative presence found someone who elevated mediocre material through sheer force of talent. Yet reviews consistently focused on measurements rather than performance, establishing pattern that would persist throughout her career. The business negotiations surrounding her contracts revealed someone who understood financial structures with impressive sophistication. While other sex symbols allowed agents and studios to manage their careers, Jayne insisted on involvement in every decision. She negotiated salary increases that outpaced many male contemporaries, demanded profit participation when such arrangements were rare, and maintained ownership of her image in revolutionary ways. The Pink Palace she purchased wasn't just Hollywood excess but brilliant marketing strategy. The mansion became tourist attraction, publicity goldmine, and symbol of someone who had successfully transformed herself into destination rather than merely person. Every pink detail reinforced brand identity while providing private space where she could pursue intellectual interests the public never associated with her persona. Image versus self, the gap between public performance and private reality was widening with each successful publicity campaign. Her competition with Marilyn Monroe, largely manufactured by publicists, revealed strategic differences between two approaches to blonde bombshell stardom. While Monroe seemed genuinely vulnerable to fame's pressures, Jayne maintained psychological distance from her public image that allowed more effective manipulation of it. She understood that the blonde bombshell was character she played, not identity that defined her. But this understanding was becoming burden as much as advantage. The intelligence that had created her success was also making her increasingly aware of its limitations. She could see the beautiful prison being constructed around her, but each attempt to escape only reinforced the bars. By the late 1950s, Jayne had achieved something unprecedented. She had become one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars while maintaining more creative and financial control than most contemporaries. But success had come at costs that were becoming impossible to ignore. The public image that made her famous was also limiting her opportunities and obscuring achievements that might have brought lasting satisfaction. They see my body, but they never hear my heart. The brilliant mind behind the blonde facade was screaming to be acknowledged, but the world had decided what story it wanted to tell about her, and intellectual accomplishment didn't fit the narrative. The 1960s arrived like harsh spotlight on Jayne's carefully constructed empire, revealing structural flaws that no amount of publicity genius could repair. The cultural landscape was shifting beneath her pink platform shoes, and the blonde bombshell image that had seemed like brilliant strategy was becoming costume she couldn't remove without losing everything she had built. A beautiful prison had become her permanent address. The film roles that should have demonstrated her range instead trapped her in increasingly narrow variations of the same character. Directors saw a reliable purveyor of sex appeal but seemed incapable of recognizing acting abilities that had impressed those willing to look beyond measurements. Scripts arrived that treated her intelligence as either non-existent or comic relief, forcing someone with genuine intellectual gifts to play dumbed-down versions of herself. "I'm a girl who lost her reputation and never missed it," she declared. But friends noticed brittleness beneath the bravado. The woman who had manipulated media with surgical precision was finding it increasingly difficult to control narrative that had developed momentum of its own. The public image had become a self-perpetuating machine that no longer required her creative input to maintain itself. Brains versus body, the tension that had driven her success was now destroying her opportunity for growth. Her attempts to pursue more serious dramatic roles met with industry resistance that revealed Hollywood's fundamental inability to reimagine stars beyond established personas. Casting directors who might have considered her for complex characters couldn't see past publicity photographs and tabloid headlines. The very success of her strategic self-promotion had become barrier to artistic evolution. She won the game so completely that she was never allowed to change the rules. The financial pressures mounting during this period reflected both changing industry economics and costs of maintaining elaborate lifestyle that had been essential to her brand. The Pink Palace that had been brilliant publicity investment was becoming expensive monument to image that no longer generated corresponding income. Tours of the mansion provided revenue but reinforced public perception of her as curiosity rather than serious performer. The nightclub circuit that increasingly provided her primary income revealed both her desperation and her professionalism. While critics dismissed these appearances as decline from legitimate entertainment, they actually showcased abilities that films had never properly utilized. Her stage presence, comedic timing, and audience connection demonstrated talents that might have flourished under different circumstances. Image versus self. The performance was consuming the performer. The exhaustion that characterized this period wasn't simply physical weariness but psychological fatigue from years of living as performance art. The intelligence that had once energized her career had become burden as she recognized limitations that fame had imposed while feeling powerless to transcend them. Her private life during these years revealed someone trying to maintain authentic relationships while dealing with pressures few people could understand. The children who observed her daily saw a mother who emphasized education, spoke multiple languages at home, played piano to help them sleep. This domestic Jayne bore little resemblance to public figure, yet authentic version remained largely invisible to world that had decided what story it wanted to tell about her. "I feel like I'm running out of time," she confided during this period, words that would seem prophetic in retrospect. The urgency reflected not just career pressures but deeper awareness that brilliant mind behind blonde facade might be forgotten entirely if circumstances didn't change soon. The alcohol and prescription drug use that began affecting her health wasn't mere Hollywood excess but symptom of someone trapped in situation offering no acceptable exits. The intelligence that had been her secret weapon was becoming source of torment as she recognized the beautiful prison she had built for herself. "They see my body, but they never hear my heart." The phrase had become mantra for someone who had achieved everything she had set out to accomplish while losing everything that had made the achievement worthwhile. By the mid-1960s, the woman who had once been Hollywood's most strategic performer was becoming prisoner of her own success, trapped in beautiful cage constructed from pink satin, publicity stunts, and society's refusal to acknowledge complexity that challenged comfortable stereotypes. The final chapter was approaching, and even her strategic brilliance might not be enough to rewrite an ending that seemed increasingly inevitable. The pre-dawn darkness of Highway 90 in Louisiana held more than fog and danger. It carried the weight of a career that had become too heavy to sustain, a public image that had grown beyond any one person's ability to control, and a brilliant mind that was slowly being suffocated by the beautiful prison it had helped construct. June 29, 1967. The pink Buick Electra speeding through the Bayou night carried Jayne Mansfield away from another small-town nightclub performance, another reminder of how far she had traveled from Hollywood sound stages where she had once commanded attention. The financial pressures that demanded constant touring, the scheduling conflicts that made rest impossible, the exhaustion that comes from living as perpetual performance, all of it was grinding toward conclusion that no amount of strategic thinking could prevent. A beautiful prison was finally collapsing, but the architect was trapped inside. The collision with the tractor trailer at 2:25 a.m. was random accident, split-second event that ended life lived so carefully in public eye. But the mythology that sprang up around her death, particularly the gruesome rumors about decapitation, revealed society's continuing need to sensationalize rather than understand, to consume rather than acknowledge. Even in death, they saw her body but never heard her heart. The immediate aftermath was chaos of emergency responders, media attention, and public shock that transformed traffic accident into cultural event. The woman who had spent her career generating publicity found her death becoming biggest story she had ever created, though not in ways she would have chosen. The false rumors that dominated headlines demonstrated how thoroughly her death was being viewed through lens of spectacle rather than human loss. Newspaper editors who had covered her career with mixture of fascination and condescension found final story that seemed to validate their portrayal of her life as cautionary tale about fame's dangers. But the investigation that followed her death led to implementation of safety improvements that became her most lasting legacy. The Mansfield Bar, underride protection systems installed on large trucks, prevented similar accidents and saved countless lives. The practical result of her death accomplished something her life's work had attempted, using her name to protect others while creating legacy more meaningful than any entertainment she had provided. Her children's survival of the accident ensured that more complete version of her story would eventually be told. The youngest witnesses to her complexity would grow up carrying memories of mother who bore little resemblance to public caricature. Someone who had read them bedtime stories in multiple languages, who had played classical music to help them sleep, who had emphasized education and character over appearance and fame. The funeral became final performance, with thousands of mourners gathering to say goodbye to someone they felt they had known intimately despite never meeting. The service revealed gulf between public perception and private reality that had defined her entire adult life, as family and friends struggled to honor memory of complex woman while managing media circus that had shaped her career. The legal proceedings revealed financial situation more precarious than public had realized. Despite earning substantial income during peak years, combination of expensive lifestyle and industry changes had left her with debts that estate struggled to resolve. The pink palace that had symbolized her success became asset that had to be sold to satisfy creditors. Hollywood's response revealed industry's complicated relationship with someone who had both benefited from and been constrained by its star system. Memorial tributes acknowledged her contributions while often reinforcing same limited perspective that had frustrated her during life. Few recognized intelligence and business acumen that had distinguished her from other sex symbols. The media coverage established narrative frameworks that persisted for decades, emphasizing tragedy and spectacle while downplaying achievements that didn't fit predetermined story. The brilliant strategist who had revolutionized celebrity self-promotion was being remembered primarily for measurements and rumors. But something else was beginning to emerge from careful analysis of what she had actually accomplished. Academic researchers examining 1950s Hollywood found evidence of business acumen, creative input, and cultural influence that contemporary coverage had ignored. She had been pioneer in areas that wouldn't be widely recognized for decades. Personal branding, image ownership, strategic media manipulation. The real tragedy wasn't how she died, but how long it took world to recognize what it had lost. The accident that ended her story paradoxically gave it new beginning as historians and cultural critics began examining complexity that had been obscured by publicity and prejudice. Her influence on popular culture continued expanding in ways that surprised critics who had dismissed her as temporary phenomenon. The approach to celebrity she had pioneered became template for future generations, while her business innovations seemed remarkably prescient as entertainment industry evolved. Today, more than 5 decades after her death, Jayne Mansfield's legacy continues evolving as each generation discovers her story anew. The woman dismissed as blonde Bombshell is increasingly recognized as someone who used intelligence and determination to challenge industry limitations, while paving way for future performers to exercise greater creative control. The academic research that emerged in the 1980s and 1990s began revealing the sophisticated business strategies that had been hidden beneath her publicity campaigns. Scholars examining 1950s Hollywood found evidence of contract negotiations, image ownership arrangements, and promotional innovations that anticipated modern celebrity management by decades. The woman who had been dismissed as airhead was actually pioneering approaches to personal branding that business schools now study as case examples of strategic thinking. Her influence on the development of celebrity culture extended far beyond entertainment industry boundaries. The techniques she developed for managing media attention, controlling narrative development, and monetizing public interest became templates that political figures, business leaders, and social activists would later adapt for their own purposes. The pink aesthetic that had seemed like frivolous decoration was actually sophisticated visual communication strategy that influenced everything from product marketing to political campaigning. The feminist movement's initially complicated relationship with her legacy gradually evolved toward more nuanced understanding of her contributions. Early feminist critics had struggled with how to interpret someone who had used sexuality as a tool for gaining power, often viewing her as either victim of patriarchal system or collaborator in her own oppression. Later analysis recognized that these categories were insufficient for understanding someone who had simultaneously challenged and reinforced gender stereotypes while creating unprecedented opportunities for female performers. The entertainment industry's treatment of aging female performers remained largely unchanged for decades after her death. But her example provided framework for understanding how systemic discrimination affected even the most successful women. The pattern she had experienced, rapid rise to fame followed by gradual marginalization as she aged, became recognized as industry standard rather than individual failure, leading to advocacy efforts aimed at creating more sustainable career paths for female entertainers. Her children's eventual public statements about their mother provided crucial counter-narrative to established mythology, describing someone whose private life had been characterized by intellectual curiosity, creative expression, and genuine maternal commitment. Mariska Hargitay's success as serious dramatic actress particularly helped rehabilitate her mother's reputation, demonstrating that intelligence and talent were family traits rather than exceptions to blonde bombshell stereotype. The safety improvements implemented as a result of her accident, the Mansfield Bar underride protection systems, became her most concrete and lasting contribution to public welfare. These devices prevented thousands of similar accidents and saved countless lives, creating legacy that extended far beyond entertainment industry into realm of practical public safety. The irony that her death had accomplished something her life's work had attempted, using her name to protect others, wasn't lost on those who understood the complexity of her career. The rise of reality television and social media platforms in the early 21st century created new contexts for understanding her pioneering approach to celebrity self-promotion. Many of the techniques she had developed for managing public attention and monetizing personal brand became standard practices for influencers and reality stars who might not have recognized the historical precedents for their strategies. Her approach to controlling narrative while appearing to reveal everything became template for modern celebrity culture. The nascent Me Too movement and broader conversations about consent and agency in entertainment industry provided additional frameworks for re-examining her career. The power dynamics that had shaped her relationships with studio executives, directors, and publicity managers were recognized as part of systemic problems that affected all female performers, while her strategies for maintaining some measure of control within those constraints were seen as early examples of resistance to industry exploitation. Digital restoration projects and streaming platform availability made her films accessible to new audiences who could evaluate her performances without the cultural baggage that had shaped contemporary reviews. Younger viewers, unfamiliar with the publicity campaigns that had dominated coverage of her career, were more likely to notice her comedic abilities, screen presence, and professional competence rather than focusing primarily on her physical appearance. Documentary filmmakers and biographers who examined her story in the 2000s and 2010s had access to previously unavailable materials, personal correspondence, business records, and family interviews that revealed the complexity that publicity had obscured. These projects consistently found evidence of strategic thinking, creative input, and business acumen that challenged conventional narratives about her motivations and capabilities. The questions her life raised remain urgently relevant in an era of social media influence and personal branding. How do we balance authenticity and performance? Can someone use objectification as a tool for gaining agency? What are the psychological costs of living as perpetual public persona? How do we create systems that allow talented people to evolve rather than trapping them in successful but limiting identities? Modern celebrity culture, with its emphasis on personal brand management and direct audience engagement, might have provided Jayne with tools she never had access to during her career. Social media platforms could have allowed her to control narrative more directly, while streaming services might have provided outlets for the range of performances that traditional studios had never encouraged. The creative control and financial independence that eluded her during life might have been achievable using digital platforms that didn't exist in her era. But the fundamental tension she had navigated, between intelligence and sexuality, authenticity and performance, personal fulfillment and commercial success, remained challenging for contemporary performers. The beautiful prison she had constructed from publicity and pink satin has been replaced by different constraints, but the underlying questions about female agency and artistic freedom continue requiring solutions that society has not yet developed. Her story serves as both inspiration and warning. Inspiration for anyone seeking to transform limitations into opportunities, and warning about the costs of success that comes at expense of authentic self-expression. The strategic brilliance she demonstrated throughout her career proved that intelligence and determination could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. But her ultimate fate suggested that individual excellence might not be sufficient to change systems designed to limit human potential. The platinum blonde hair has faded from cultural memory, but the roadmap to freedom she created through strategic thinking, business innovation, and refusal to accept conventional limitations remains relevant for anyone seeking to transcend the categories that society uses to define and constrain individual possibility. Her legacy challenges each generation to ask whether they are creating systems that allow brilliant people to flourish, or beautiful prisons that trap them in successful but limiting identities. If Jayne had been born into the streaming and social media age, would she still have been trapped inside the platinum blonde prison of public perception? Or would digital platforms have provided the creative control and direct audience connection that traditional Hollywood denied her? The answers matter because they reveal whether we've actually progressed in how we treat brilliant women, or simply changed the forms of consumption while maintaining the same fundamental limitations. She was born brilliant and died blonde, but everything in between was a roadmap to freedom that Hollywood was too frightened to read. They remember her measurements. History needs to remember her strategy. The most beautiful prison is still a prison, but Jayne Mansfield spent her life proving that even cages can be weapons when wielded by someone brilliant enough to understand the game and brave enough to play it better than anyone imagined possible. Her heart is finally being heard, decades too late but right on time for anyone willing to listen to what brilliant women have been trying to tell us all along. That intelligence and beauty aren't opposites, that strategy and authenticity can coexist, and that the most revolutionary act might be refusing to choose between being seen and being understood. The platinum blonde hair has faded, but the road map to freedom remains, waiting for the next brilliant woman brave enough to use it.